morning, everybody. Welcome. It's Resistance Live for the 7th of November. It's Election Day. I know you all know that. I am going to talk about that in a minute and a lot of other things because we've had just again an extraordinary number of breaking news developments in the last 24 hours. But first things first, I'm ECM, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. This is Resistance Live. And I am coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a black turtleneck top. My hair is pulled back. I have in my thick gold hoop earrings. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde woman. My pronouns are she, her, and welcome. We've got people from all over the country here today. I was sort of looking through this as we were getting ready. I just want to shout out everybody who's voting today. I'm really grateful to those of you who've already made it to the polls, those of you who are planning to get to the polls, and those of you who are working the polls, because I know there are some of you out there as well. Heard this morning from some of our Patreon subscribers that you're going to miss us live today because you're working the polls, and more power to you. So let's just talk for a minute about where we are in this election. It is another election day. I have to remind everybody that elections don't just happen every 2 or 4 years. We have some very significant elections happening today, the results of which are being very closely watched. Today is the last day to vote in Ohio on issue 1, which will, if it passes, ensconce the right to abortion in the Ohio state constitution. It is also the last day to vote in Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin, the current governor, has promised as recently as this morning that he will ban abortion statewide in Virginia if he gets a Republican legislature. We also have an incredible election going on in Kentucky that hopefully will reelect the rare Democrat in Kentucky, namely Andy Beshear, who is the current governor who's running for reelection. We have a significant election in Mississippi where perhaps, fingers crossed, Tate Reeves, who is an incredibly far-right figure, will be booted out of the governor's office. We have an incredible candidate running for governor there, and hopefully he will be elected. In Pennsylvania, we have a significant Supreme Court race, which could have some bearing on how the electoral count works in Pennsylvania next year, and also will have some sway over whether or not abortion stays legal in Pennsylvania. It doesn't change the makeup of the court, but it ensconces what would hopefully be a liberal majority. And so if you live in any of those places or anywhere else where there's an election today, I implore you to vote. Vote, 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 vote. It's more critical now than it has ever been. And so many human and civil rights will be determined for millions of Americans today on the basis of who's elected and who isn't. So really critical day. We're going to be watching results on this all day long. And I just very much want to implore you to get to the polls, to encourage everyone you know to get to the polls, to call your friends and neighbors and ask if they voted. Do they need a lift? When are they planning to vote? What's their voting plan? Do they know where they're voting? And for those folks who are already doing or continuing to do, we have so many people in this community, phone banking into states like Virginia, text banking into states like Mississippi. Thank you so much for doing that work. And please keep it up. All right. Hopefully the end of tonight will be yet another repudiation of the far right wing of the Republican Party and the Republican Party itself. And again, notwithstanding the polls, I have to remind you all that nothing is final until people vote. So please go do it. All right. Huge number of developments legally in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, as you all know, because it was happening while we were live here on the air, Donald Trump took the stand in New York. As was predicted, he got more and more contentious as the day went on. He gave a lot, however, of really damning testimony about his own responsibility for financial statements and what he knew and what he didn't know. He also left and made a whole slew of incendiary statements. None of this should come as any surprise. He also bashed the judge, bashed the Attorney General of the state of New York, literally while on the witness stand yesterday. And now we all get to get ready for Ivanka Trump, who's going to be called tomorrow. Now, we had some questions about what happened yesterday, particularly why he wasn't held in contempt of court. And I have to remind you all that Judge Engoron has been walking a very fine line in this case, because what he's seeking to do is to avoid a claim of bias such that a ruling that holds Trump accountable for hundreds of millions of dollars of fines doesn't get overturned by the appellate courts in New York State. And so basically what he decided to do yesterday after an initially contentious moment in the morning was allow the prosecution team from Tish James's office to take the lead. If they objected, if they found a problem with Trump's testimony on a given question, he would follow their lead in terms of objection. And multiple times, the U.S. attorney, not the U.S. attorney, the attorney general's representative, the lawyer from the AG's office who was questioning Donald Trump, said, no, I'm fine. I'm okay. Let's just keep going. And part of that was because when Trump is allowed to talk, he incriminates himself. So I'm not bothered by the fact that we didn't see this morning anything, or rather yesterday, anything that would have resulted in a contempt proceeding, or for that matter, would have removed Trump from the stand in favor of adverse inferences, which the judge did threaten to do at one point. I just want to remind everyone here, though, that the judge is trying in everything that he does to be fair and balanced to the extent that it will prevent him from being overturned on appeal. And that's what we want, right? We want it to stick. We want a determination that he owes hundreds of millions of dollars of fees and that he can no longer conduct business in the state of New York, and neither can Don Jr. or Eric or the organization or Alan Weisselberg or any of the other defendants. We want them done with, in New York in particular, because it's been the anchor of their real estate enterprise. We want their assets in New York State to be seized, including Trump Tower, because like the public humiliation is necessary and so is accountability. So I want everyone to be really, really clear here that what he is trying to do is make sure that everything sticks. Okay, so don't complain about it. He's doing the right thing. Okay, the other thing that we learned yesterday is that the defense is going to start their case as soon as Thursday. And we think that they're going to recall people like Don Jr. and Eric to the stand to try to clean up some of the mess of their initial testimony. Yesterday, we learned that the trial is anticipated to end sometime around December 15th. That means, in my expectation, that we're going to have a ruling from the judge before Christmas. So happy holidays. Hopefully we will have a finding that Trump is not just liable and for fraud, but actually is going to pay like the vast bulk of his available assets in fees to the Attorney General of New York. All right. Somebody asked a question about how long the appeal is going to last. It really depends on what they choose to appeal. Now, it's very clear from Alina Habba's quite, I just have to say this, off the rails and unethical comments that she made to the press yesterday afternoon, that they kind of intend to appeal all of it. And they're still trying to create this scenario where somehow the judge's clerk passing notes to the judge, which happens all the time in every courtroom that any litigator has ever set foot in, is somehow an indication of bias. I will tell you that, the appellate process might take 2 years. And it also could go much faster than that. It really depends on what they appeal, how deep the issues go, and, particularly whether or not the appeals court chooses to review certain issues or dismisses them out of hand. I just personally am not bothered by that either, because one thing that I have to remind you all of is that, again, we want the process to work. We want judicial accountability. And, he's being publicly humiliated by the moment, which is something that is about as bad as it can get for someone who's a malignant narcissist. If he loses and there are fines, yes, of course, we can expect him to fundraise off of it. Yes, of course, we can expect him to bash the judge and to bash Letitia James and everything else that he's already been doing. It doesn't mean that he's not liable. And it doesn't mean that he's not in the end going to end up paying like all of those fines. It doesn't mean his assets can't be seized. So folks just need to be very, very, very patient, and also understand that the public humiliation is actually the most painful part for him. So that's already underway at a very significant level, and no one should be shocked that he's, melting down constantly about all of this. As for whether or not nothing happens until the appeal's done, one of the things that people should be aware of is that, if it is a $250 million fine, which is what Tish James has asked for, there will probably be an attempt on appeal to reduce that fine. All right. So they're not going to execute against his assets until it's a final determination. But again, I have to remind you, this could all go fairly quickly, or it could take a couple of years. All that said, though, please understand that in addition to this case, he's facing prosecution in Fulton County, Georgia. He's facing prosecution in the district court for the District of Columbia. He's facing prosecution in New York City. And we still have this kind of like looming case in Florida where, Judge Cannon is doing her thing. Nobody should be under the impression that he's escaping accountability. This is one of those things that I just think is shocking to people, that like folks are still walking around thinking that he's going to get off scot-free somehow magically with 91 indictments in 4 different jurisdictions and a civil fraud case that's destroying his business and already has. I mean, no, that's not going to happen. All right. And, indeed, we didn't really talk about it very much yesterday, but the second part of the New York Times poll that had everybody in an uproar on Sunday came out yesterday, and it found an enormous swing in voters' choices, even under the faulty methodology of that poll. You all know my feelings about it, but an enormous swing in voters' choices in the event that Trump is convicted of a crime, which I'm just going to tell you right now, you can quote me on this, is going to happen in advance of the Republican National Convention. You can just take it to the bank. Now, I'm very rarely wrong. I've been wrong maybe a handful of times here before in the last 7 years, but I'm going to tell you that with the roadmap that we currently have, there's no way he's not going to be convicted of a crime in advance of the convention. All right. And I think we're going to have a very different landscape in terms of where we're going to be by this time next year. All right. Joe Jean, could you delete that comment, please? We can do a lot of things here without, engaging in misogynist commentary about Alina Habba's body or face or mouth. There's a lot of reasons to criticize her that have literally nothing to do with the way that she looks. Okay. I want to talk for just a minute also about what's happening in the district court for the District of Columbia. One of the things that folks should be very aware of here is that we are still in very active motions in front of Judge Chutkan. One of the things that is very clear from some filings yesterday is that Jack Smith is for lack of a better way of putting it, to the wall in terms of how he is treating Trump's motions to dismiss. So yesterday afternoon, evening on the East Coast, we got the brief from Jack Smith's team opposing Trump's motions to dismiss in DC on the basis of the indictment somehow being faulty, and also on First Amendment grounds and double jeopardy grounds and the impeachment clause. And for those of you who didn't see it, I did a whole breakdown of this on Threads, where I went through it page by page and sort of culled out the most significant elements of Jack Smith's opposition. But I'm just going to tell you this, all right? The indictment is going to survive. The claims of presidential immunity have already been briefed, and that brief was also very significant by Jack Smith. The claim that somehow the fact that he wasn't convicted in the Senate on impeachment means he should never be indicted ever again is sort of put to bed. And that particular part of the brief is very spicy, for lack of a better way of putting it. And also all of the allegations about the First Amendment are very deeply briefed. It is an incredibly thorough and erudite and well-written brief by Jack Smith's team. Nobody should be worried about this one. All right. Now, we did have some more questions about the appellate process for this. So one of the interesting things that Jack Smith's team did at the end of that brief was it asked for the double jeopardy provision to be ruled upon in writing by Judge Chutkan as being meritless, as being, in fact, inherently flawed. And the reason why they did that is because there are provisions that say where there's a double jeopardy provision that may be in play, you can get an intermediate interlocutory appeal. That means you get to appeal before the whole case is over, which is ordinarily not the case on motions to dismiss. That has to wait normally until the entire trial is done. By ruling, if she chooses to do so, that the double jeopardy argument is, essentially flawed and has no merit and was filed without any basis in law or fact, they can prevent that interlocutory appeal. So what he's trying to do here is stop an intermediate appeal that would delay the March 4th trial date. And I think he's also going to be able to do that. I have to say that there's literally no basis. I mean, you guys can go read the 76-page brief if you want, but there's literally no basis in law or in fact to claim that the impeachment clause and the fact that he was acquitted at impeachment somehow means he has double jeopardy protection when literally his life and limb, those of you who were here when this brief was initially filed heard me talk about this a lot on this broadcast. But when this brief was initially filed, we talked about the fact that in order for double jeopardy to apply, you have to have been charged with the same stuff and you have to be under threat of life or limb as a result and have already been acquitted. Not being able to serve as the president of the United States is not the same as being in prison. I mean, I know this is a no-brainer for everyone here, but it's very, very obvious. All right. And so I think Chutkan is going to do what needs to be done here to stop an interlocutory appeal, to hold the trial date and to keep it going. And I want people to just, again, be aware that you don't have to read every piece of this. This is why, like, I did this whole long summary last night on Threads so people could have the big takeaways. But also understand the Jack Smith's team is incredibly good at what they're doing, and their briefing is really thorough and it's really well written, and they're not missing any points. And so I really don't think that there's any risk here that somehow there's going to be dismissal, because that's not going to happen. Or that, for that matter, we're going to have a long delay on appeal. Okay. And I have to remind everybody as well that even in instances where there might be an appeal of the double jeopardy issue, that can be fast tracked through the federal courts. I got to remind everybody that Trump's appeal on the gag order is being fast tracked right now. Okay. Like, he filed his brief to, his brief on that is due before the DC Circuit today. And he literally only filed an appeal like 5 days ago. So, or 7 days ago. So, we're really not in a position here where the DC Circuit is letting anything like lag. And again, I just have to remind everybody, because I see people panic about appeal schedules. Please keep in mind that we have 5 separate massive proceedings here, okay? They're underway right now. We have New York State, which is civil. We have the DC criminal case. We have the Florida criminal case. We have the prosecution that's underway in Fulton County, which is going to go to trial in advance of next summer, guarantee it. And we also have the prosecution in New York City. So again, like, don't panic. Just don't panic, okay? Don't panic. Okay. Let's just talk for a second about the issue of the RNC debate. Now, I hate to tell you guys, it's not like we need like one other moment of this week, because this week is insane. Like, I mean, I told you that, guys, this week was going to be really bad. It's crazy. Tomorrow, in addition to Ivanka Trump taking the stand, and in addition to the fact that we have Trump's brief due on the appeals for the gag order, we also have the third Republican debate. Only 4 people have qualified for it, okay? It's Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Chris Christie. It's going to be a much tighter field than it has been historically. Yes, I will be watching it. And I will probably be live threading it as long as I can kind of like keep my dinner down while I do it. Last time was really a struggle because of all the kind of inherent transphobia and Islamophobia and like anti-Semitism and like everything else that was like rife in it. But I'm going to watch it so you don't have to. And you can kind of like rest assured that I will be doing a recap of it after the fact on Thursday morning. But we have that to look forward to tomorrow morning as well, tomorrow afternoon as well. Now, one other major legal development that's happening today that people should be aware of, a case called U.S. versus Ibrahimi had oral argument this morning in front of the Supreme Court. For those who are not aware that this case was pending, this is a case where a man who was under a protective order for engaging in domestic violence against his girlfriend had a federal ban on having a gun license and possessing a gun applied to him. He then engaged in 5 shootings in 2 months. He was arrested, he was prosecuted, and he was sent to jail for 6 years. He then challenged on appeal his Second Amendment right to hold a gun, to own a gun, and to possess a gun, as somebody who nonetheless was subject to a protective order for domestic violence. This case turns my stomach. I'm just going to be really honest about it. I think that it is an incredibly dangerous moment, not just for victims of domestic violence, but with regard to the Second Amendment law in general. I did, do a little bit of a catch up on the New York Times live stream this morning about what was happening inside the Supreme Court as this argument was going down. Curiously enough, John Roberts seems to be on the side of allowing the law to stand, and in fact was asking a series of questions about what constitutes a dangerous person who should not be allowed to own a gun, and wouldn't that necessarily be someone who had engaged in shooting. We also saw Judge Jackson, as always, doing her incredible work of making all the valid points about gun safety, about domestic violence, about the inherent need for protection, about the prior limits that had been sort of eradicated by the Supreme Court in the Bruin decision, which may be rolled back a little bit by this one. And we'll have to wait and see what the ruling from the court is on this. However, I think it's not impossible that we might see a swing here that allows the law to stand, with a couple of the ordinarily conservative justices joining with the 3-person liberal side of the court to allow this law to be upheld. The real question is what they're going to do with regard to the ongoing issues of how Second Amendment law is evaluated in front of the Supreme Court, which really has to do at the moment with historical basis rather than whether or not there's a public safety need. And that's what the Bruin case is about. So we're going to have to see what happens with this. And, I have to say, as I said this morning, the Second Amendment says a well-armed militia. Somebody should explain to me how somebody who's subject to a domestic violence restraining order constitutes a well-armed militia, because even like the most uninformed among us when it comes to like constitutional law can look at this and be like, what the heck? So in any event, we'll have to see how this plays out. We'll have a ruling by next June or the first week in July at the absolute latest. And I just hope that it goes the way that we want it to. All right. So folks should be aware of that as well. Okay. Couple of other developments, not like we need any more. Many of you have heard me talk about the Cop City RICO indictment here. This actually came down from the same grand jury that was involved in all the indictments against Donald Trump and his people. For those who don't know, Cop City is a proposed training ground outside of Atlanta that would involve basically tearing down like thousands of acres of a forest and putting into place a training center for the militarization of Georgia police. And where other people could be trained as well from out of state. And essentially for environmental as well as ethics and human rights reasons, it has been subject to something called the Stop Cop City movement. All right. And there have been protests and there's been mobilization. I'm going to remind everybody that there is a First Amendment right to protest in this country. It is like to petition your government to protest. It's written into the First Amendment. There are legitimate First Amendment rights for it. And yet this grand jury indicted a whole host of people under RICO. Those of you who have heard me talk about RICO abuse before will find this familiar, claiming that the people who were protesting, many of whom have not engaged in any form of violence whatsoever, but have literally just been protesting Cop City, are now alleged to be a part of a RICO conspiracy. Those folks are being are being arraigned today, I believe. And how this goes is going to be anybody's guess. We're expecting that there are going to be motions to dismiss. I would expect that there are going to be challenges on constitutional grounds. And my hope is that this will all fall apart, in part because if it doesn't, the precedent that it sets is going to be very dangerous from the context of mass and particularly nationwide mobilization against things like police violence, on behalf of movements like Black Voters Matter. People who were indicted in this RICO conspiracy, by the way, are not all from Georgia. There are people who were indicted from all around the country simply for being a part of the Stop Cop City movement. It's really an effort to silence protest. And my hope is that it goes away, and it goes away quickly. So again, I want people to be aware that we have to kind of like watch this from where it sits. And yes, Allison is right. Nashville is also trying to build a cop city. And so the precedent for what happens in Georgia is going to affect other states that are now trying to build essentially like these militarized police forces with training grounds and whole cities where they get to train for like hand-to-hand combat against like just average everyday people who are protesting. Those of you who remember like the moms movement in Portland after the George Floyd murder will find this very familiar. You will remember that Trump sent in like the border patrol into Portland. And essentially they tear gassed moms and kids, right? They fired rubber bullets into crowds of like legitimate protesters. And it went on for weeks. Okay. Like if you do not want for your police force to be armed to the teeth, like, the army, and to be given permission, furthermore, to kind of like commit mass violence against people who are protesting, you should have your eyes on what's happening with these indictments in Georgia. I'm worried. Okay. I thought Tim Scott was out of this one. I saw somebody say that they thought Tim Scott was going to be on the debate stage. I thought he didn't qualify. He may have qualified like late in the game for this one, but the last reporting that I saw was that there were only 4 people on the debate stage, as I mentioned. If he's there tomorrow, he shouldn't be. He should quit. All right. Final comments for today. Actually, let me just say one other thing. I know there's a lot of anticipation of what Ivanka is going to do tomorrow. I'm just going to tell you my predictions on this. All right. And you all know that I knew her back when she was a Democrat and that we collaborated together back when she was a Democrat. And I had no idea her dad was going to run for office. And, hindsight is 2020. All right. I'm just going to tell you, I don't think there's any way in hell that she throws her dad under the bus. And I don't think it has anything to do with money or inheritance. I don't think, Jared's wealthier than her dad will ever be, for all sorts of reasons that ought to be investigated. And I also think that she's got, she has never lost by backing her dad, right? One of the things that I want people to think through here is that the dynamics of being raised by a malignant narcissist, particularly one who's been like accused of raping your own mother, create family dynamics for all time that are disturbing, that are about things like enabling and codependency, that require every child in the family unit to develop really specific coping mechanisms. And at least in my observation, and I know this from personal experience as well as conversations that I had with Ivanka after her father announced, and when I said I wouldn't work with her anymore, that she does not feel empowered under any circumstances to cross him. She hinted at that in conversations that I had with her. I do not expect that anything has changed since then. If anything, I expect that that's become more ensconced. And so nobody should be kind of like sitting back and waiting for her to do something damning in her testimony tomorrow. Okay. She's also got her brothers to deal with, and they are reliant on the inheritance, even if she is not. So I would not expect tomorrow to be any sort of like dramatic moment. I would not expect her to say anything that's going to throw her dad or her brothers under the bus. I think everybody should kind of have low expectations for what we're going to see from that tomorrow. Okay, final bit of news today. There's a lot of development happening in the last 48 hours around the SAG-AFTRA strike. The Association of Motion Picture and Television Producers, which is the other side of SAG-AFTRA, that's like, Disney and Paramount and all these other companies, all right? Netflix. They submitted to SAG-AFTRA what they said was like their final best proposal, final last best proposal, take it or leave it kind of thing to the union. And that was over the weekend. And what ended up happening is that once the union reviewed it, they realized that it contained clauses that, for instance, I mean, this kind of stuff is just like terrifying to me. One of those entertainment conglomerates could take a scan of an actor and pay them for 1 day of work, and then use that scan to create artificially intelligence-generated images of them in entertainment for all time. They could do it to people who have died and use their images for all time with no compensation to their estates. When you think about the advancements in terms of CGI, the end result of this, as SAG-AFTRA has been saying this morning in rejecting this final last best proposal, is that it essentially what's at stake is the end of paid work for everyone in the union for all time if they were to accept this proposal. All right. So that doesn't mean that the Association of Producers is not going to come back to the table, right? Like they can't do anything without their talent. But at the moment, I want people to be very, 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 very clear that we got to stand with unions, because this is, in essence, the future that a lot of people are facing down right now. I have to just mention that, even for people like me who are content creators, there's a lot of discussion right now about the use of AI in content creation. And one of the reasons why I'm live streaming is because, you can't manipulate a live stream, at least not yet, right? Nobody's going to be able to come on here and claim that I'm saying something that I'm not if I'm live streaming in real time and you're all here witnessing it. These are issues that are going to impact all of us. And they also impact people who are like behind the scenes doing like gaffing and set work and lighting and all that other sort of stuff. Because if all of that can be done by CGI and they don't need talent, right? There's no work in Hollywood ever again. So everyone should be very clear on why it's being rejected. And I hear you, Kim. I have friends who are voiceover actors who have been out of work this entire time. I know that, everybody in the industry is desperate to get back to work. And the conditions that are being proposed by the association right now are so severe that they would basically end the industry for all time in a matter of years. And so, really important, like really, really, really important that we back the union. And I do think that the pressure is built so much right now on the association that there will be another counter proposal, despite the last forever for all time final offer situation that they were sending over the weekend. So keep your eyes on that. Okay. That's all the breaking news for today. I do want to remind everybody we're going to have election results rolling in throughout the afternoon and evening Pacific time here. If there's a need to go live, I will absolutely do that. Reminder, please, everybody vote. Also, I've got, I had up to 700 people on here live. Do me a favor and give me your thumbs up by clicking on that like button below. That can be your vote for me for today. But please don't forget to vote for your actual electoral candidates. And don't forget to share this broadcast with your friends if it's helpful. Please don't forget to subscribe, because it makes a really big difference in terms of who gets to see this. And also, I got to remind everyone that, if you have questions, if there's something that you want me to address, you can head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You get to ask questions for 2 hours in advance of every broadcast. You get to join us for Progressive Coffee Hour, which is a wonderful Sunday event that I just love because it's like intimate and fun. And we talk about things other than politics, although we do talk about politics and law as well. And there's lots of perks there in the upper tiers for subscription as well, if you're interested. Okay. That's it for today, my friends. Take it easy. Crazy week. Just an absolutely crazy week. And please take care of yourselves. Get some rest. Stay tuned for the breaking news tonight on the elections, because I'm really hoping that we kind of wipe the floor with the far right and the Republican Party yet again. It sets a good runway for 2024 if we do. And so grateful to all of you. So grateful for your presence and your ongoing support. And I will catch you all here at the absolute latest tomorrow morning at regular time. All right, my friends, have a good one. I will see you soon. All right, bye.